Ahead this hour, President Trump heading to the border after issuing an emergency declaration for Washington, D.C. ahead of next week's inauguration. Here was the president today before boarding Marine One. President Trump have finally spoken. Are they still on the same page, politically speaking? And what does their relationship tell us about the future of the Republican Party? And Democrats twisting the words of the Constitution in their latest attempt to push a new impeachment article. Legal scholars are skeptical why Nancy Pelosi is maybe wasting America's time again. And is this only going to worsen the political division in America? Also today, foreign nations not known as bastions of free speech now piling on President Trump's Twitter ban and big tech's lockout of conservatives. But it's not stopping there. United Airlines passengers being booted off the airlines for singing the national anthem. Parler suing Amazon. PayPal blocking pro-Trump groups with no history of criminality. What's next for big tech? And after months of pushing unconstitutional lockdowns, which have gutted New York City and the state, Governor Cuomo pulls a 180. He now says New York can no longer wait for the vaccine. What changed? All this and more ahead this hour on John Bachman Now. Hello and welcome. Noon here on the East Coast, 9 a.m. on the West Coast. Thanks for joining us today on Tuesday, January 12th, 1 week from the inauguration. And at this time next week, President Trump will no longer be president, but he has declared an emergency for the District of Columbia through January 24th. This says Homeland Security is also increasing its measures leading up to Inauguration Day. Acting Homeland Security Secretary Chad Wolf is now moving up the timing of a special security event to Wednesday instead of January 19th, citing this week's violent attack on the U.S. Capitol, as well as an, quote, evolving security landscape. Wolf also resigning this week. The FBI has also issued a bulletin warning of plans for armed protesters in all 50 state capitals and in Washington, D.C. in the days leading up to the inauguration. The Washington Post, also reporting that several Capitol police officers today have been suspended, and more than a dozen are now under investigation for their role in last week's breach of the U.S. Capitol. There are allegations of incitement and collusion here as well, so the timeline is critically important. News organizations like the New York Times have done their own analysis of this timeline. Several other sources have confirmed this as well. At about 12:15, the rioters started walking towards the Capitol, and the president at this point was only 15 minutes into his speech. This is also when those pipe bombs were first reported at both the Republican National Committee headquarters and the DNC's HQ. Now, this all later around the security situation currently in Washington, D.C., and welcome in Newsmax national correspondent Logan Raddick. Great to see you, Logan.
Good to see you too, John. And we know that at least 25 domestic terrorism investigations are underway. And according to Ohio Democrat Congressman Tim Ryan, at least 2 Capitol police officers are under suspension facing allegations of misconduct while they were on the job in last Wednesday's unprecedented situation here on Capitol Hill. And the finger pointing continues on both sides of the aisle as to who bears the blame for the escalation last week.
President Trump is also granting D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser's request for an emergency declaration.
This is necessary because the inauguration poses several unprecedented challenges that exceed the scope of our traditional planning processes. The COVID-19 pandemic and, of course, the domestic terror attack on the United States Capitol.
Still, the mayor is expressing concern.
Scared of anything, it's for our democracy because we have very extreme factions in our country that are armed.
And the Pentagon is authorizing the deployment of up to 15,000 troops for Inauguration Day. That is another protective measure taking place on January 20th to ensure the peaceful transfer of power. John.
A show of force to ensure the peaceful transfer of power. Logan, we'll see you in the next hour. Thanks so much. All right, Vice President Mike Pence and President Trump yesterday meeting for the first time since last week's violence at the Capitol. According to a senior administration official, the men agreed to work together for the remainder of the term, suggesting there are no signs that President Trump is planning to resign before January 20th. What happens next after that, who knows? Pence also signaled he would deny any demands to immediately oust the president through the 25th Amendment. Let's welcome in now, or we'll have more with Newsmax White House correspondent Emma Robinson in just a moment. Let's welcome in Mark Halpern now, political analyst and host of the Mark Halpern Focus Group, to talk more about this. Great to see you, Mark.
Good afternoon, John.
All right, so President Trump is not resigning. Vice President Pence will not invoke the 25th Amendment. We know this wasn't going to be happening. The chances of impeachment, obviously, they can have this article of impeachment, but what it means for the presidency, we'll see. But has the hatchet been buried between Vice President Pence and President Trump?
Well, you know, President Trump is interesting. There are times when he is a big forgive and forget guy. I have seen him have major conflicts with folks who he then is happy to work with. And at other times, he holds a grudge. I think most of us are like that situationally. Mike Pence has been exceedingly loyal. They did not have a close relationship, to say the least, before 4 years ago when Pence was put on the ticket. And I think in the end, President Trump recognizes it's in his short-term interest to avoid Mike Pence thinking about the 25th Amendment for the two of them to get along. And I think longer term, Mike Pence has played a unique role in Donald Trump's life, not just his professional life. And so my guess is that both of them will agree to get along despite the clear friction that's existed over the last week.
It was obviously a marriage to bring together the establishment wing, which Pence represented, and the new Trump wing of the party here. And, you know, everybody's going to be looking at this relationship moving forward to see what it tells us about the future of the party.
No question. I mean, look, Mike Pence had a political identity before he became Donald Trump's running mate, but that was mostly for insiders. He was not particularly well known as a congressperson and then as governor of Indiana. His national aspirations existed before. They exist now. He'd like to be president of the United States. I think his chances are pretty minimal based on talking to Republicans at the grassroots level and around the country. He's seen as a loyal vice president, but not necessarily someone who could run for the top of the ticket. That, though, was the view of George H.W. Bush, who eventually, of course, became president, and Al Gore, who went on to be his party's nominee and win the popular vote. So I think people are underestimating Mike Pence, and I think he will always be part of the Trump political family, and that is worth something, particularly now when the party is really facing a kind of a crossroads about what its identity is like in the post-Trump era.
You know, you look at this objectively, it's hard to imagine, you know, a more difficult situation for Mike Pence to be in last week. And, you know, by all accounts, he passed the test, even though some people obviously not happy with him, you know, pushing that challenge as they wanted. Also, let's talk about the impeachment aspect of this. Now, Democrats are citing a very rarely used constitutional amendment. Legal experts are very skeptical. The American public probably skeptical, too. There's lots of polling out there. From what I've seen, it's not great. But YouGov, Marist, Ipsos all had polls showing that this is like a 50-50 issue. It seems like it could backfire on Pelosi and the Republicans who support it.
Well, it could. I mean, there's lots of sentiment out there. But right now, I think the most important thing to emphasize in terms of sentiment is Democrats in the House and to a large extent in the Senate, they're not thinking about public opinion polls. I'm not even sure they're thinking much about public opinion. They are red hot angry about what happened on Wednesday, about the invasion of the Capitol and the responsibility they put on the president. And so regardless of what happens, what the House Republicans do, what the president might say, I think they are bound and determined to impeach the president. And I think, unlike sometimes when politicians say, well, we don't care about the political consequences, and they don't really mean it, I think this time Democrats mean it. They're not really thinking about the political calculations. They're thinking about what they, fueled by anger and outrage, want to do.
Now, Joe Biden says he wants unity, and you think he could stop this impeachment of an incoming president? He could say, look, you know, Jared Kushner just met with my national security advisor, Jake Sullivan. The transition is happening now. The president said it would happen, so let's focus on the future and not the past. So why haven't we heard something like that from Biden yet?
Well, he sent a soft signal last week. He basically said the way Donald Trump should go out of office is on January 20th. But he's clearly not publicly objecting to the impeachment. And my understanding is that privately, the Biden team